Good morning and welcome to the Global Immersion webinar we're calling Be Brave, How to Have Hard Conversations Around the Holiday Table. We're very grateful for you all to be with us this morning, afternoon, depending on where you are in our country. As people are tuning in, I just want to show you at the bottom of your screen, there is a little chat. And you can actually pop that open and let us know your name and where you're calling in from. That would be awesome, just to help us know where folks are coming from. But before we get too far into our content for today, I just wanted to say two things. My name is Haley. I don't believe that I introduced myself yet. And I'm the Director of Communications and Development at Global Immersion. And I'll be hosting our webinar today, which I'm very grateful for. But before we dive into all of that, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the shooting that happened last night in Thousand Oaks. I know that our team has felt very affected by that, carrying a lot of emotion. And I just want to give permission and freedom just to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded, and we believe so deeply in the content that we are going to be moving through today. But in lights of tragedies like what happened last night, it doesn't maybe feel as important. And so if you need space to lament or process the events of last night, the anger and frustration and sadness, that is 100% understandable, and this content will be here for you whenever you're ready to move into it. So just wanted to start with that acknowledgement and that permission that if you need to hop off of this, we will be sending out this recording in the next 24 hours so you can engage with this when you're ready. So I'll just give a moment for people to kind of decide where they're at, what they want to do. But before we kind of hop into all of the amazing goodness that we have for you today, I'm just going to introduce myself again. I'm Haley. I'm the Director of Communications and Development here at Global Immersion. And I feel so convicted about the content that we're about to engage in today. And as the Director of Communications, I see a lot of the chatter that happens online in and around our content on Facebook. And I have just noticed this past few months, I think everyone has noticed, that anxiety is running high when it comes to a lot of topics that are going on today. You know, we're just coming out of the midterm elections. The news is covered with divisive and very triggering rhetoric. You know, all of the stories of the migrant caravans and people's reactions to them, the Supreme Court hearings. And then, you know, as we're feeling very strongly today, the topics of gun control are still very much a critical and divisive conversation of our time. And so as I see people gearing up and getting ready to move into the holiday season with their families, anxieties are kind of going through the roof about how is this going to play out around our holiday tables. And I feel very convicted about this specific conversation. I think that something I think often is that you can really tell the caliber of a peacemaker by the state of their home and their closest relationships. And it's easy to speak truth to people, to strangers or people over the internet, but what is the state of your actual home and those friendships that are closest to you? And are you able to have these difficult yet meaningful, and we'll talk later on about potentially very restorative conversations with the people that you're closest to. For those of you that are joining us maybe for the first time and aren't familiar with Global Immersion, we are a peacemaking training organization. And we train people of faith how to engage the pain in our world in restorative ways. And we do this primarily through immersion trips that we take in San Diego, Tijuana, and Israel, Palestine. as well as coaching, consulting, and speaking, and then online resources such as e-courses and webinars like the one that we're doing right now. And I have to pause specifically to thank our Embers community. They're our group of reoccurring donors that give faithfully every month, who invest in the work of peacemaking that we're doing. And it's only because of them that we're able to do free trainings such as this one. And don't worry, I will be sending out information on how to join that community after this webinar. So let's orient ourselves a little bit to this physical Zoom space. Maybe, well, it's not really physical. I suppose it's more virtual. This virtual Zoom space. For those of you that haven't used Zoom before, there are a lot of awesome functionalities. You're already utilizing the chat, which I'm really grateful for. It's amazing to see everyone that's tuning in from all over. My friend Charlie from college is here. Hi, Charlie. I'm really excited that you're here. And also at the bottom there is a little Q&A box. If you hit that, that's where you can put your questions for our panelists. And we're going to be coming back to those questions at the end. But as questions come up, definitely pop them in there so that we know how much time we need to create at the end. No guarantees that we will make it through all of the questions, but we'll do our very best, at least to capture some of those themes that we're pulling out. So what to expect on our webinar here. Before I move into that, I'm going to actually share my screen here really quickly. For those of you that are the tweeting type, we are also going to be sharing this experience over on social media on Twitter. Here is the information for all of our panelists and global immersion, as well as the hashtag that we will be using. And we would absolutely love for you to share any insights or quotes that pop out to you from our panelists as we share throughout this next hour together. It's an awesome opportunity to engage our greater community and folks who aren't able to be on this exact webinar with some of the things that we're talking about. So hashtag TGIPA webinars is the hashtag that we'll be using, and feel free to tag any of these panelists. If you want to take a quick screenshot of this, then those handles will be preserved for you. Screenshot taken. Great, exiting out of that. So today we're going to really be focusing on a few things. I think, as we've mentioned before, moving into this holiday season, people are I was literally at a gathering last night, and one of the women, we were talking about our intentions for the month, and she was talking about forgiveness and saying that moving into this holiday season is always really difficult, because sometimes even if we're very close with our families, a lot of these really charged topics can be things that either create this resentment, maybe we don't engage with it, and so we start building resentment towards our family, or maybe it creates a distance. We feel like we can't relate to these people the way that we once were as we continue to change and evolve. And we've all experienced hard conversations done well, maybe, hopefully, but we definitely have also experienced hard conversations done really poorly. And that can be extremely traumatizing for us. Maybe we feel it in our bodies in a physical reaction as we think about the hard conversations that we're about to have. But I feel very convicted that these are critical conversations that we need to be having. If we can't have real conversations with our people, then what right do we have to be having them outside of our own communities? And so we're really challenging ourselves on how can we be brave in these conversations. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be hosting us, moving us through the conversation, but the real highlights of this webinar are Joe and John, who are going to be helping us really engage this content. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves here in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to have us all have a moment of centering, trusting that that God has given us the tools and given us everything that we need to engage in these conversations. And John and Joe are going to equip us even further. But we have been brought to this moment for a reason, and that's because we are ready to have these difficult conversations, or we have the right intention, I suppose. So maybe some of you are at work and you have this up in the background, and that's totally fine. But if you're able to just enter into a moment of centering with us so that we can bring ourselves into this moment, just feel the seat underneath you, maybe put your feet flat on the ground, and then we're going to take a few breaths together. So breathe in and out, breathe in and out. Let's do one more breath. Grateful to be sharing this space with all of you, and very excited for the ways we're going to learn together in the next 50 minutes. So Joe is the director of Respero. It is a counseling organization that's committed to helping people deal with life in healthy ways, which I think is an incredible mission. Joe, do you mind hopping on and sharing a little introduction?
Sure. I'm a pastoral counselor here in Santa Cruz, California. And I've been doing this kind of work, pastoring and counseling, for close to 40 years now, in many different parts of the country, Ohio and Indiana, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is one of the most conservative places in America, and now for the last 25 years in the Bay Area, California, Santa Cruz particularly, which is not the most conservative place in the country. So I've got to experience people in many different places, and am committed to the belief that while life is hard and people are hurting, everybody needs somebody to talk to and can benefit from that. So about 8 years ago, I started this nonprofit organization, Respero, to be able to create spaces for people to have personal conversations. I do my own personal counseling ministry, but most of all, we train people to do counseling. We try to identify people that are gifted and give them the kind of information and self-awareness and skills so that they can be of substantial help and encouragement to people that just need somebody to talk to that are going through rough things. And we're actually doing that training online now, so it's accessible all over the country. And I should add that the primary way I identify myself is as John Huckin's friend. So we've got that.
Amazing. Well, speaking of that guy, John, do you want to give a little introduction yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I guess I don't need to after what Joe's handoff there. Yeah, John Huckins. I'm the co-founding director of Global Immersion, and as Haley said, we're a peacemaking training organization. And so as an organization with a mission to train people of faith to engage our divided world in restorative ways, having hard conversations with people who are closest to us might be some of the hardest work we're called to do, but some of the most important as well. And so for me, this is a topic that I feel like personally, it was some of these spaces that made me most aware of the need for peace and peacemaking in not only in my theology and in my theory, but in my practice. And as I'm a peacemaking trainer, but more than that, I'm a practitioner. And so I'm energized about this conversation because this is a conversation that's really real and practical and has played itself out in my own life and around our own tables, and now what our organization is so committed to do.
Awesome, thanks. John, we're actually going to start with you. as the peace, I would love to have you just kind of lay that groundwork of how are we tying this hard conversations to our practice as peacemakers? Why are these things that we need to have, and how is this an expression of our commitment to peacemaking?
Yeah. Let me start with a couple words about peace and what it is and what it isn't. We define peace as a holistic repair of relationship, and so peace is not passive. Peace is not some kind of pseudo tranquility that we have created that gives us the illusion that everything has been worked through. It's not shoving stuff under the rug when hard conversations come about and we walk away from them. Peace is actually rolling up our sleeves and moving toward and through conflict such that we could actually experience healing and restoration, that we could actually experience genuine relationship. And this is one of the core peacemaking paradigms that we often train and coach in is called conflict transformation. John Paul Lederach is the scholar who developed it, and he would argue that that conflict specifically is the most dynamic laboratory for genuine relationship. That conflict isn't a problem to solve; it's actually an opportunity for transformation. We just need tools to engage it well. And so, when we're talking about hard conversations with people that are closest to us and its connection to peacemaking, this is one of those moments where we have the opportunity to identify a conflict and either passively withdraw because we just don't have the tools, or we're just terrified of the conflict, or oftentimes we move towards it, but with tools to destroy rather than the tools to heal. And that neither of those are helpful, and neither of those are going to move us towards holistic repair of relationship, towards peace, towards restored relationship with those closest to us. And so the connection then to hard conversations and the work of peace or peacemaking is seeing that these hard conversations are actually a dynamic opportunity for each one of us. As terrified as they might be, and even as we think about 2 weeks from now around our holiday tables, and the anxiety and maybe the past fear and and some of the trauma we've experienced, at our best, these are opportunities for us to participate with God in restoring what has been broken in our world, beginning with ourselves in those relationships that are closest to us. So conflict is an opportunity. This connection to hard conversations and peacemaking is at the epicenter of it. A couple additional themes I would add to making this connection between hard conversations and peacemaking is this is an opportunity for us to model who we are, to model our identity as ones who are reconciled, as Apostle Paul would talk about. And this theme throughout the biblical story that we don't have to prove our way to belovedness, to be loved. We are created and we can live in a reality where our identity is in place, no matter if we disagree with someone, no matter if we convince someone else that their opinion is wrong and ours is right, and they move into a different direction. These tables, these hard conversations are opportunities for us to not compromise who we are, but learn how to embrace it in a way that isn't just leading with unnecessary provocation or being judgmental or leading in such a way that we have to prove our way to belovedness. And so this is an opportunity for us just to be true to our convictions, not in a pious way, but use the art of storytelling and invitation to bring people around the table to enter into a space that is generous, that is hopeful, that is healing, and free of a concern from our perspective to appease other people and to gain everyone's respect and reputation, because the work of peacemaking and living into core convictions is not going to please everyone. Like, everyone's not going to be thrilled about where we land on any given issue. That doesn't mean we have to compromise where we're at. It also doesn't mean we have to convince others. And so part of this is learning to embrace difference and liberating ourselves from changing other people's minds, as if we can do that. And sometimes we think that we can just shame people to transformation, and that doesn't work. And so what does it mean for us to enter into these hard conversations that we're going to talk about some really tangible practices here later, in a way that isn't just about saying the right thing and hoping it works, but about being the right kind of person who creates space for us to go on a journey together towards our collective healing. And so the opportunity is great, but it's also going to take some work, and we need to have some tools to engage it well, which is obviously the goal of where we're heading in this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, John. We're going to come back to unpacking some of that later. But I'd love to, for Joe, for you to jump in, because it's interesting. There's the conviction behind having these hard conversations, but then there's also this very real bodily reaction and maybe fear that comes around actually engaging in those. And so can you help us understand that actual science? Like, there's a science behind this fight or flight instinct that happens when we are looking at these difficult conversations. Would you just spend a little time helping bringing us into what's actually happening in our bodies?
Yeah, I think that that's important to just know and recognize that what is happening in our brains, in our bodies, physiologically, as when we're in those kind of conversations, and when it feels really stressful. When we are in a lot of stress, especially when it's kind of hits us suddenly, something happens in our body. Our bodies are designed so that when it feels like we're in danger, or when we are in, that something harmful could be happening to us, that the part of our brain called the amygdala sends a message to another part of our brain called the hypothalamus, which then sends a message down to our adrenal glands. And they release these chemicals. They release these hormones. Adrenaline, we're all familiar with that. And adrenaline rushes. And another chemical called cortisol. And what these chemicals do is they're designed, our bodies and brains are designed brilliantly, of course. And the adrenaline gives us this extra measure of strength and extra measure of focus, the ability to focus so that we can deal with the danger and get out of the danger. And then the cortisol is also designed to do that. But what cortisol does is it blocks the hormones being released in our brain that are what we might call the happy hormones, or the ones that make us feel calm and peaceful, like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. Because when we're in danger, we don't want to be calm and peaceful necessarily. We want to be able to get out of the danger. If I'm on the tracks and the train is coming, I want to be able to react. And that's what the adrenaline and the cortisol allows us to do. And it can be the same in a relational setting, in a conversation where, with a parent or a sibling, it takes a turn that feels very, very stressful, and you feel threatened or in danger, so to speak. Your body is going to release those chemicals, and so you're going to start feeling anxious. You're going to start feeling this sense of, what do I do? And fearful and anxious. And that's just normal and natural and happens to everybody. And it can happen in these kind of family settings around the holidays, where there's a lot of family dynamics and past history and differences of opinion. I remember 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, sitting around a table with about a dozen people, and one person speaks up and says, "All right, let's go around the table and let everybody say, are you for Hillary or are you for Trump?" Just out of the blue, just very unexpectedly. And a lot of the people had that deer in their headlights look, and, oh no, how am I going to handle this? What am I going to say? Am I going to be honest? what's the person ahead of me going to be saying? Am I going to have to go first? And I guarantee you that in most of the people around that table, those chemicals were being released. The cortisol was flooding the brain, and that makes it hard for you to think clearly. That makes it hard for you to feel calm. So that's what happens in our brains, and it makes sense because we are designed to respond to threat or danger to get out of it immediately. But when you're in a relational setting and you might feel trapped around around the table, and you don't really have a good exit, that makes it worse because it feels like you don't have anywhere to go. So in response to that danger, this flight or fight response, we want to get out of the danger either by attacking and overcoming the enemy or the perceived threat, or just running, getting out of it. And that's a natural response. But again, in relational settings, it may not feel like that's an option, which only increases the stress, which increases the anxiety, and then people feel trapped, and it can be a horrible feeling. But I think it's important to understand this is normal. This is happening to everybody. There's not something wrong with me that I'm feeling this level of anxiety. Here's what's going on in my body and in my brain. And so knowing that, we can also know that the key in those kind of situations is stress reduction. That if I'm able to lower the stress that I'm feeling, then I will be able to stop the cortisol from dripping. And by the way, why are we having so much anxiety? So many people struggling with panic attacks and anxiety. It's because we're now living in a world where stress is nonstop. It's not just, oh, there's a danger, I'm flooded with adrenaline and cortisol that gets me out of the danger, and then that stops. Now we're in stress all the time, whether it's in traffic or hurried lives, and the cortisol is dripping like a leaky faucet, and then it builds up. And so these good chemicals that make us feel happy and calm just can't be transmitted. These neurotransmitters aren't working. And that's why there's so much anxiety. But in the moment, as you anticipate being with family or potential hard conversations around the holidays or after the elections, I believe that the way to reduce stress is prepare ahead of time, or at least that can be very, very helpful. And to think about what are my goals. I mean, I think there are 3 or 4 questions that we can ask ourselves in advance that will help us train for these kind of conversations. And so in the moment, it won't be as stressful, and we'll be able to handle it well. We'll be able to think clearly. So I think the questions like, what are my goals? What do I really want to see happen in those conversations? What's within my power? And it's so crucial, like John has already said, that we don't have a goal to win. That when we go into those conversations, we're clear that it's not my goal to win. It's not my goal to be right. It's not my goal to change the other person or convince them of my position. It's my goal to be a peaceful presence in this family around this table. It's my goal to speak the truth in love. But the statement in the letter to the Romans that says, as much as it is up to you, as much as it depends on you, with all people be at peace. And I can't guarantee a certain outcome, but here's the person that I want to be. And if we're thinking about that ahead of time, if we're clear on what our goals are, that when that moment happens, when your uncle or your sibling pops into that conversation with a, I'm glad that we've got troops going to the border. A nation that doesn't protect its borders isn't a nation at all. What do you do? What do you say? Or they turn to you, right? Don't you agree? That in that moment, if you've prepared for it, it won't be as stressful. So I think to ask ourselves, what's my goal? What's really at stake here? When I think about that conversation in advance, to be able to realize I don't need their approval. I don't need my family's affirmation. I don't need them to think I'm smart. I don't need them to like me. I want it. I mean, of course, that's a genuine, legitimate desire. That would be nice, but I don't need it. I don't have to be codependent or simply panic and withdraw or agree with something that I don't really agree with, because what's really at stake here? My worth and value is based on how God sees me, is based on being deeply loved and known and delighted in by God, and not how my family sees me. I want them to affirm me and to approve of me, but I don't need it to truly be okay at the deepest level. And I think if we're asking ourselves those questions, what am I afraid of? What's at stake? What are my goals? What are my expectations? Expectations kill relationships. So if I've thought through those questions, and I'm clear on what my expectations are and who I want to be, the stress will not be as great, and the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that's released will not be as great, and therefore I will retain my ability to think clearly and be calm, to be a non-anxious presence with my family. So I think that those are some of the key things with regard to the brain science and knowing what stress does and knowing how to reduce the stress.
Awesome. Joe, say we do all of the preparation in the world to get ourselves into a calm, somewhat detached, low expectation place, but our uncle says that one thing, or says that thing that is just throws us over the edge or tempts us to what do we do in those moments when we feel that calm may be about to explode, to keep ourselves present, and to not escalate the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, escalation requires two parties. So I can simply choose to not engage in the same way that they might be and not raise my voice. But I do think it's also crucial to have a couple questions ready, and to know that what I want to do in these conversations is to ask questions and listen to understand, not just to respond, because I don't have to win. But I think it's good to have some questions prepared ahead of time in anticipation. If Uncle Bill says, some startling statement, to be prepared to ask, well, help me understand why that matters so much to you, or what do you think is really at stake in this kind of an issue? I think if the other person won't engage in a genuine back and forth dialogue, that you can make a direct request. I think direct requests are a crucial part of healthy communication. So to be able to say, could we please, I would love to talk about this. If we can have a conversation that's a mutual back and forth, and where we agree that we're going to listen and we're not going to interrupt each other. So are you willing to do that? And just to make that kind of request. And if it gets to a place where that's just not possible, where the other person or people around the table won't agree to that, at some point, I think it is okay to disengage if it's truly, truly not safe, not an emotionally safe place, but to not do to really stay in the conversation, committed to asking good questions, committed to listening, but not raising the voice, but have some questions prepared and be willing to make a direct request about the kind of conversation and the tone of the conversation that you want to have.
Totally, that makes
a lot of sense.
Ooh. John, I have a question for you. Joan, don't mind muting you. There we go. You hear multiples of me. Everyone's worst nightmare. Quick reminder to throw some questions in that Q&A box for Joe and John that we can loop back around to here in the next 10 minutes or so. But John, I wonder if you can interact a little bit. This thought is not fully formed, so I apologize if it doesn't come out just really fluently. But I wonder where the tension is. You know, you kicked us off by kind of sharing how to have these hard conversations about listening longer than feels comfortable, and Joe, you too, about like, you know, not having these expectations and coming prepared. But I'm curious, like, where is our responsibility to our family? If our family really holds like some hateful beliefs about people, and what is our responsibility as peacemakers to also speak into that, to provide a different narrative, and even in these really divisive places, I think, you know, it's more than, I just feel this tension between like having these like really healing and equal conversations, and then also like our obligation and to speak our convictions. How do you have any insight onto how to balance those, or how to do that well?
Thanks for the doozy, Hales. Jeez. That is a great question. And I think it's really critical because and I'll tell you what, it's one thing for me as a privileged dominant culture white guy to say listen longer than feels comfortable in the moments of conflict, when there's times that my silence can be complicit with perpetuating broken systems that are literally breaking my neighbors. And so there is your question is necessary, especially for people like me to wrestle with. So a couple thoughts on that. One, I think it's really critical for us around these tables not to start with issues and how we debate an issue, but to start with our relationships. I think sometimes because the issues are so present to all of us and our different perspectives on them, it's on all of our minds. And so we want to start with an issue, but that's often not the best starting point. Not that we don't go there, it's not that we don't have that conversation, but let's just begin with simple questions like, hey, how are you doing? What's been some challenges for you recently at work or in your family? What are you excited about? I mean, thinking through our actual relational network, we might be feeling the angst to get to the issue, but if we don't begin with a relationship and model that we actually care about the human being behind the perspective, we're going to be on the wrong tracks. And even if the issue comes up, it's probably not going to come up in the right kind of way. Secondly, going back to your point, yes, one of our peacemaking practices in the moment of Uncle Joe, sorry, Joe, to use your name here, it starts heating up and saying stuff that you just completely disagree with. The rhetoric is hot. What does it mean for us to listen longer than feels comfortable? Like our skin is beginning to crawl and we listen longer. Or as St. Francis' prayer would argue, we are to actually seek to understand Uncle Joe in that moment rather than to seek to be understood ourselves. Now, a couple thoughts on that. Some of the reasons we bring that up so much in our peacemaking training is oftentimes our desire to be right is the primary focus rather than our desire for mutual transformation and growth in relationships. Another way to put it is it's more about our ego than it is about creating space for our collective restoration. And so these practices help us keep a check on our ego and our check on a desire to be right and to win rather than to be on the road together. At the same time, and this is where the nuance of your question comes in, how do we do that without being complicit to racism, being complicit to sexism, being complicit to broken systems, again, that are breaking people? And I think it's critical for us to be students of the relationships with those that are closest to us, whether we're close to them, actual and like relationship, or just because they're our blood and we share a table together a few times a year. We have a responsibility to be students. And when is the moment we actually need to step in on behalf of those that are being stepped on to say what needs to be said, but say it in a way that is gracious and invitational, and usually just by telling a story. Like, from my experience, what does it mean to be a good storyteller that's inviting people to a human reality behind our rhetoric? And so, if I were to say, what are some practices as we go around these tables, we need to be able to have, I would say, come up with one curious question you can ask each person that's going to be around the table that day. Because you've been students of them, because you love these people, what's one curious question you can ask them? And what are a few stories that you could share that would illustrate what you care so deeply about in a way that invites them on the journey with us? Because reality is we're all on a journey. And if I can't have grace with people that have they're on a journey that I've been on a few years ago, not to say that I'm necessarily further along the road, we're all just on different points on this thing, and we can't have grace with each other along the way, then these relationships will just fracture, and then the whole game is over, and our ability to walk with them and ourselves towards restoration will end. And so a couple other things, I would say tangible, accessible practices and moving towards these. So come in with a couple curious questions, come in with a couple stories that lead towards invitation rather than critique or shame. Give yourself a break if you need to. Like, as Joe talked to us about, if there is a neurological reality happening and we can now, that's now normal. Like, when I hear Joe talk, I just think, okay, that's just a human condition. Not that I'm some crazy person. And if that's reality and I'm beginning to heat up and I'm only working through my amygdala, take 5 minutes and step outside and take some deep breaths and do some centering and be reminded of our identity, and that we don't have to compete for a reputation or compete for everyone's affirmation. We just need to be who we are. So give yourself a break, and in that, circle back to our identity, our belovedness. One last thing I'll say, and this is going to come up in a follow-up resource that we'll send, a blog with some tangible practices. What would it mean to bring one object to your dining room table over Thanksgiving or Christmas that illustrates something restorative or hopeful in your life? And each person has an object, and you go around the table and you share how this object illustrates restoration or illustrates hope, and allow that to be our leading conversation rather than just the stuff that we disagree with or want to debate.
Thanks, John. A reminder again for people, if you have any questions, go and put those into the Q&A. I also just tossed out into the thread. I'm personally just curious. We had close to 300 people sign up for this webinar, which to me shows that there was a lot of resonance around this particular topic. And I'm just curious, like, what is it about going into this holiday season that is giving you angst? And maybe there's a way that we can speak to those things specifically. We do have a question here, John, from Melody. Like, could you give, just because we're right on this, can you give an example of like what an object of restoration is? Can you unpack that idea a little bit?
You bet. Yeah, I would say an example that I experienced Tuesday would be my little "I voted" sticker. I might bring that to the dining room table for my Thanksgiving, because why? I walked to our voting booth. It was on our block. It was at our community center, which represents so much beauty for us, not only in the fact that it's wildly diverse in the people that participate in life at our community center, but the people who checked us in and gave us our ballot were our neighbors, and they represented 3 different ethnicities, and it was this picture of there is a collective of us in our neighborhood who care about the common good as the center, and we're not only like signing off on political ballots, but we're actually sharing a space together. So as I came out of that voting booth, I felt convicted going in there to vote what I voted. And I also was celebrating what that space represented for me, for our family, and for our neighborhood. So it literally might be as simple as me bringing that sticker and then just sharing that story. And so what would that object of restoration or hope be for any one of us in our own context?
Thanks. Joe, so John shared a few kind of practical preparation steps about preparing a curious question and potentially bringing an object of restoration. I'm curious, do you have any really practical ways to prepare for these difficult conversations? If you were just to give like one piece of advice to someone that you know is going into maybe a tense, is that a word? Sure. Environment. What would that piece of advice be?
I think spend 10 minutes a day for the 10 days or 2 weeks preceding the holiday or the event, where you are just practicing some focused reflection on those questions that we talked about, and you're using it as an opportunity to remind yourself about your identity. You're doing that. You're reminding yourself and centering yourself once a day about, this is who I want to be, and this is who I want to be with these people. I want them to truly know me. So I'm gonna be myself. I'm not going to practice, the impression management. The other thing I might suggest is that you role play. If there's somebody else that that you would have to do that with, where you're the person in your family that you anticipate will be the hardest person to talk to, or the person who might bring up, the rough question or topic, that you be them and somebody else be you, or then you trade off, but that you just role play. You practice what you want to say and how you want to say it. It's just it's preparation that will help you remember in the moment when you need it the most. And I would, you had us do some deep breaths, practice deep breathing right there at the table in the middle of the conversation. Breathing is great. It gets more oxygen to the brain, and it slows us down. So, but there's no substitute for the work of just that focused reflection and reminding yourself in preparation. I have a counseling client, who was anticipating a very difficult conversation with his mother about Thanksgiving, that they actually weren't going to be going to his parents' house that year for Thanksgiving. And it's a very difficult family dynamic. In this family, you don't disappoint mom and live. So he was very nervous about the conversation, but he prepared himself every day for about 10 or 15 minutes a day, and he went into that phone call, that difficult conversation with her, and he was able to do it actually quite well. He said what he wanted to say, and he didn't crack when she did her manipulative, guilt, shame-inducing stuff that she does. So I've seen it with clients. I know it for myself, that the mental preparation will help reduce that stress and go a long way.
Fascinating. We have a few questions, and I think I'm going to hop over to the questions And then we'll loop back around to where is the opportunity in all of this. So I find this question from Jim super interesting. He's kind of commenting on something he saw Charlie write in the chat, but he says, Charlie used the term blatant, or use of the term blatantly caught my attention. And I'm curious, if someone is speaking in a way that is intended to get a rise out of you, what's going on inside of them or between the two of you that has little to do with the subject at all? I know that's a big question, but Joe, is that anything you feel like you might be able to speak to?
Sure. In family situations and family systems, there's always a lot going on under the surface. So yeah, somebody may make a comment that's intended to provoke you or get a certain reaction. And I think that, again, kind of an advanced commitment to giving yourself a moment before you respond, just knowing that that's okay, and maybe asking a question, help me understand what you mean by that. Or it might sound like a delaying tactic, but that's okay. It's help me understand why you would ask me that, or help me understand what it is that you're really asking or what you want to know. I'd say ask a clarifying question. You may know the person well, and you may feel like you know what's going on, that they just want to irritate you or frustrate you or draw you into a conversation that's where they feel like they can win. So I think it's important to remember that you don't want to let somebody else's foolishness work with you. You don't want to let somebody else's wrong strategies work with you. So don't let it work. Don't take the bait. But again, the chances are best that you're not going to take that bait if you've thought about it ahead of time.
We have another tricky question that came up, and I don't know that there's a right answer to this, but we have someone who's curious about how does this, I laugh even just saying it, like what is our obligation to our in-laws? I don't know that there is one universal answer to this. Obviously, all of our relationships with families that we marry or partner into is very different. But kind of speaking back to, John, what we were talking about earlier about what is our obligation to speaking, to humanizing and standing up and in front of people that are being dehumanized. Does that end with people we're not blood related to, or do we need to carry that same commitment into that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate, peace is not passive. And so walking away from those hard conversations with maybe people we've married into, or someone that's 1 degree separated from our actual blood family, is necessary. I think, again, it comes back to discernment and where are we at in our relationship? What's the capacity for our relationship? There's an opportunity here with in-laws and our own nuclear families that, at least in theory, these are people we're going to be around the table with for a long, long time. So to go in, and Joe hit on this, to go in with expectations that we're going to convince of everyone to get to a certain place around a 2-hour meal is just a bad starting point. It's not a healthy expectation. It's probably going to lead more in the tone of judgment and shame than it is towards collective transformation. And so I think we need to speak up. We have to use discernment about where we're at in the relationship. And I think it was Sarah's question that came up here too. Like, if we begin to share stories that maybe make our in-laws or others uncomfortable, if we're speaking our convictions out of a tone like, here is my experience, rather than here's how it is objectively, that even is a good starting point. Things may heat up and escalate to the point where it's unhelpful. And I think in those moments, it's really, Joe used language like, inviting us to use language like help me understand. I think that's a great starting point. I think it's also okay and necessary at times to name what you're experiencing. Hey, I'm experiencing this actually move less towards us in desiring to strengthen our relationship and more towards just a provoked debate. And to me, I care about you, I love you, and that's not helpful. That, to me, that doesn't actually move me towards you and towards our strengthening of our relationship. So sometimes I think it's important just to cut right in and say, here's what I'm experiencing, which is, again, it's not a passive move. It's a very proactive peacemaking move, where we can just we can name what is and lower our pulse a bit, and then rework what our terms of agreement are. Like, we don't have to work on the other person's terms, especially if they're the aggressor in that moment. We also don't have to be a jerk in that. There's ways to name it and be centered, and then move forward together.
Cool, thanks. So we're nearing our hour here, but before we kind of wrap things up, I want to end on maybe a hopeful note. Like, where is the opportunity in these hard conversations? John, do you mind starting us off, and then Joe, can you kind of round us out with some ideas?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity on just a really pragmatic level is that we'll actually be in genuine relationships with people that are closest to us. For me personally, to waltz around issues that I care most about or is real to our experience with people that are closest to me, that have been central to my formation, it's not inspiring. It doesn't lead towards growth and intimacy. So the opportunity here is to actually share life and grow in intimacy with those that we have been given to do life with. And so there's that relational opportunity that exists. The other, I would say, is more systemic. The opportunity is, if we actually walk in these relationships well, that's the stuff that's actually going to change the bigger systems that are broken in our world. And it takes courage in these small conversations and around these tables for us to name some things that we're part of, that we need to journey out of if we're to faithfully say we follow Jesus towards conflict in restorative ways in our world. And so, like, the long-term journey of us being alongside one another, arm in arm, I think is going to be the stuff that actually fixes broken stuff in our world, and the opportunity is great.
Awesome. Joe?
I think there are many significant ways that this can be a really positive thing. I think we can learn a lot about ourselves. We can just forcing ourselves to come back to the reality of what really is the source of our worth and value and our true identity, that we don't need the approval and affirmation of our families or any one particular family member. We might desire it. Of course we desire it, but we can disagree. We can do that well, and we will be okay. It won't destroy us to disagree with, a parent or a sibling. And so we can gain a lot of confidence. We can learn that I can jump off that cliff that I've never jumped off before and survive. And not only survive, but encourage somebody else, because I'll guarantee you, if you're in a family gathering, you're not the only one feeling the same way. So if you're able to be a non-anxious presence, and you're able to challenge in a good, calm way somebody else's statement, or if you're able to ask them some good questions, you've encouraged somebody else around that table that has the same fears as you, and you've shown them what it looks like to handle a hard conversation in a good way. So I think that those are two of the greatest values. You can gain confidence in yourself, in your ability to be brave and speak the truth in love in a difficult conversation. And you can, I'll guarantee you're not the only one around a big table who's feeling the same way, who shares the same thoughts and experiences as you are around that table, and you can really encourage and help them.
That's beautiful. Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So we are at the hour here, and we want to be respectful of folks' time. But just to let you know, we will be following up this conversation both with a recording of this time together, but also with follow-up resources, both a blog and a guide on how to dive further into this practice. And with some tangible ideas of like, how can we prepare for the holiday tables, and even some practices on how can we de-escalate or keep these conversations from getting out of control. So those things will all be coming into your inbox in the next 24 hours. But also just wanted to give you a few ways that you can stay connected to Global Immersion and to Joe. In the follow-up email, we'll have ways to stay connected to Joe and Respero, his organization. But we also wanted to, if you want to receive a guide, a 7-day peacemaking guide, if peacemaking is new to you, you can text peace to 66866. So peace, P-E-A-C-E, to 66866. And that will automatically send you this guide on how can you, as maybe a beginner to this peacemaking conversation, start your journey as an everyday peacemaker. So that's the best way to stay connected to us. We also have some trips that are coming up to the different borders that we visit: San Diego, Tijuana, Israel, Palestine. And so information about those will be coming out in the follow-up email as well. And we have a really amazing campaign that we're about to be launching here at the end of the year about actually funding a time. We talked about centering, we talked about rest and giving ourselves space. For those of you that have participated in any of our trainings, you know that we learn most deeply from our international peacemaking partners in Israel, Palestine, and San Diego, Tijuana. And next year, we'll actually be hosting a space for them to come to Mexico with us and just have some time of rest and restoration. And so we'll have an opportunity for everyone to help fund and bring that project together. So all of this information will be coming out to you in our follow-up email. And we could talk about this endlessly. And I wish that I could sit with each person and ask, like, what are you worried about? How can I be praying for you? How can I hold space for you as we prepare? Because these conversations are so critical, as we've talked about. And as a woman of color too, I rely heavily on allies that can go into their own families and help their own families do their own work, so that the marginalized communities don't continually need to be the ones stepping into that gap and sacrificing themselves for those conversations. And so I thank you in advance for the sacrifice and the hard conversations that you're going to have with your families, because collectively we're doing really important work together. I'm going to end us here with a blessing that may we believe so deeply in our identity as the reconciled beloved, that we can enter into these hard conversations with tools not to win, but to be transformed. We're grateful for all of you. Thank you for joining us.